Welcome to Bold Voices, Good Yarns. I'm your host, Ian Henzel. Behind every book lies an author's life story. So join me on an interactive journey as we step between the pages to explore how an author's life and their experiences have shaped the stories that we cherish and love. So sit back, relax, grab a cup of joe or a cocktail, and join me as we step between the pages. I'm Ian Henzel, and I'm the host here at Bold Voices, Good Yarns. We have an exciting show today. We have with us Rick Karlin, but first, grab a cup of joe or a cocktail and settle back as we step between the pages of Rick Karlin's life. Now, Rick has written several books. One of his books is a memoir called Paper Cuts, which is about his life working in Chicago's LGBTQ press, or volatile LGBTQ press, as he says. He also co-authored with historian Saint Suki Delacroix, Last Call Chicago, which is a history of 1001 LGBTQ friendlies, tavern, haunts, and hangouts. And it is a compendium going all the way back to Prohibition and before. And his latest book that he co-authored with Fred Fegis is Last Call South Florida, which is a compendium of South Florida, and it goes all the way back to before Prohibition and the venues and LGBTQ friendly venues in South Florida. Welcome, Rick.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. We're
bi-coastal. We're bi-coastal. Rick is in Florida and I'm on the California coast. So, a little bit different because we normally have fiction authors on, and you're a author of nonfiction. So can you talk a bit about your upbringing? I believe you're from Chicago?
Mostly born and raised in Chicago, although my very early days were raised across the street from a farm on the outskirts of Chicago, which is now a suburb. But there were actually horses and cornfields when I was a kid. It's now suburbia.
I would have never pegged you as a farm boy.
Yeah, was a farm boy. Well, we weren't a farmer. We were the very early suburbanites. But yeah, until I was in second grade, I lived out there, out in the sticks. And then my father's company that he was vice president of, Vic Tanny's, which was the pre-runner of Chicago health clubs and Bally's and all these other health club chains, was shut down by the government for signing people to long-term, lifelong contracts. And so he had 3 kids. My mother was pregnant with twins and he had no job. So they moved into the city, and we moved from like being fairly wealthy into living above a machine shop in Chicago. So, and I was just old enough to realize we had no money anymore.
So, you mentioned something I haven't heard in years, Vic Tanny's.
Yes.
And there was Jack LaLanne at the time, and I remember the commercials on TV on our old black and white Zenith television. That was a piece of furniture in the living room.
Yes.
Like right after Howdy Doody, Vic Tanny. I haven't heard that in years. God, you're taking me back. So your father was a policeman. How did that influence?
Well, when Vic Tanny's went under, he went in and he tried a couple of jobs, I remember. And then he he joined the police academy. Somehow he got in. He was fairly young at the time. I think he was probably in his early 30s. So he had 5 kids at the time in his early 30s. And he joined the police academy. They didn't pay at the time when you were in the academy. So my mom was working nights as a gaslight girl, which was kind of like Playboy Bunny. and my dad was in the police academy, and so that's how we were brought up. And then um, my whole life growing up, my dad was a policeman. Yes. And
So a
I did not
gaslight girl,
realize,
God.
yes, yes, my mom was a looker. My mom was a MILF before we knew what MILFs were. And
And many of our listeners or viewers, particularly younger people, may not be aware that the Gaslight Club. I don't know. Was it before the Playboy Club?
I think it was, yes. They were dressed up as French maids. And so they would wear these little skimpy French maid uniforms and serve dinner and cocktails. Yes. And I
So
remember my
wow,
mother going to
that's
work
interesting.
in her fishnet hose and her little French maid uniform.
Different times, eh?
Yes.
So you're a Chicago boy, and you grew up in, was it an Irish Catholic family on the South Side?
Well, no. We grew up on the north side. My mom's Lutheran and German and Irish, and my dad's Russian Jew. So we grew up in on the border of Irving Park, which was very German, and and Albany Park, which was very Jewish. So and then there was a Japanese segment over there. So my school was very diverse, and so we grew up like I went to bar mitzvahs, and I went to, with kids that went to Japanese school after school and went to Hebrew school after school, and, German classes. I didn't do any of that. We grew up as kind of pagans. My parents didn't teach anything. So,
So being a gentleman of a certain age,
yeah, I'm old.
and growing up in Chicago, and your father being on the police force,
Yes.
those were in the days of Mayor Daley, wasn't it?
Yes.
Richard the
Yes.
First.
Richard the First, who we thought was like a king, he was the mayor for life, until he died. Um, and policemen were like treated like gods, and we would go into restaurants, and I didn't realize that people paid bills in restaurants, because my father would go into a restaurant and we'd have dinner and he'd throw some money on the table and leave, and that was just the tip for the waiters. um, and it was basically, I found researching my book for Last Call Chicago, I found out later that my father was indicted for shaking down gay bars, and
Oh,
and
oh
and
gosh!
gay
And you
bar
found that
owners.
out researching the book.
Yes, yes. Found an article where my father um, was indicted, and that's why he retired early. We thought it was for health reasons, but I didn't know until I was in my 40s that or 50s that he actually had to. They offered him the opportunity to take early retirement and get his pension or go to jail, and so he did that. And then there were a whole bunch of other things that went on with him in his life. But yeah, so, and looking back, I'm really surprised. We used to go down to Oak Street when I was a kid and get our hair cut by Mr. Karlin of London, um, before the shop would open. And my brother and I and my father and his partner, on the police force, in the car, we would all get our hair cut. And then my father and his partner and Mr. Karlin would go have a discussion in the back room, and we would watch cartoons or something until they came out and we all went home.
I wonder what was going on in the back room.
I know, now that I think about it. But, it was interesting. My father had no trouble when I came out. He was used to gay people because his beat was the area around where all the gay bars were. And so, I used to listen to him and his friends talk about raiding the gay bars, and they used to talk about how Mayor Daley's son was always pushed out the back door whenever the bar was raided. Michael Daley, he ended up moving to California, and so they pushed him out the back door, and they would raid the bar.
So how did, what went through your head? What was the impact?
Oh,
You're
I mean, I
researching a
was
book
freaked
about
out, and it's
Chicago and
like,
you read an article about your father, or your father's
yeah.
in an article.
And when I wrote my memoir, out of respect for my sister, I did not include that. And she's not going to see this, so that's why I talk about it now. And my dad has passed, so but yeah, it was like, whoa. And then a whole lot of things made sense. Like, how did my parents afford both getting new cars every year when it was a cop salary with 5 kids, I mean, a whole lot of things started to make sense. Yeah, so it was kind of a shock, and I think kind of payback that I wrote this book, and the history of Chicago gay bars, when my father was the one that was shaking people down.
God, you don't expect your parent to be, part of the history, because I know there's mentions of the bar raids, and for our viewers who might not be aware, of some of the younger viewers in those days, they would arrest people and their names would be printed in the newspapers, their
Mm-hmm.
occupations. A lot of people were fired from their jobs, committed suicide. So it was a pretty nasty time in that
Well,
respect.
and a lot of
I
them,
was
if
just thinking,
you slipped a 10 to the cop, you just left, and that's how those things went. And
I wonder, did it ever go through, you read this article and you were talking about, having your hair cut by Mr. Karlin and he and your father going in the back room. Did you ever wonder, I mean, since then, have you ever wondered, was there a money exchange, or shall we say, was there service in kind?
I think my father probably had at least one or two same-sex experiences in his life. He worked as a hairdresser for a while, so I'm sure there was something going on. He was in the Navy, so I'm sure it was not unheard of for him. Um, but he was also completely, utterly devoted to my mother. I mean, I have never seen two people more in love than my parents. So who knows? Um,
So you grew up in a very colorful environment, in a very
yes,
Chicago environment.
but also a
And
very
I know,
kind of traditional in many ways. My mother did not work until my youngest sister and brother were in high school. She stayed home and take care of the house. Um, Although the minute the kids were in school, she had everything down to a science, and she was by the pool like the minute when weather was nice, she was by the pool by like 9:30 a.m.
oh, you had a pool?
We had a pool. As I
Fancy
said,
schmancy.
things started to make sense. It was an above ground pool that my father had excavated the lawn and sunk it down. But yeah, it wasn't, so it was like above ground 3 feet and below ground 2 feet. So it was I'm sure it was not done with any kind of permits or anything.
So in your book, Paper Cuts, which
Yeah,
is a memoir, and you're talking about your life, you say in the book that you had gotten married and you were still married, and you started to explore, you know, your other feelings, and that
right.
eventually led you to the offices of, was it Gay Chicago
Gay Life,
magazine?
Gay
Gay
Life,
Life newspaper.
Gay Life newspaper. Yes, I was married, I was engaged, and I was starting to realize. Here's the thing: nobody had ever said I love you to me. And so when this girl I was dating from college said, I love you, I thought, well, nobody's ever said that to me. This must be the person. I thought there was one person for you, and that this was the person that said it to me. So I thought, well, I guess I'm supposed to marry her. So I asked her to marry me. And as we got closer to the wedding date, I was starting to realize this was not a good idea. But the wedding train had taken off from the station, and I was too much of a chicken to stop it. So I thought, well, maybe after we're married, those feelings will go away. That will make it go away. And then I realized about 9 months into the marriage, they're not going to go away. So I decided to tell her I was gay. And the day I decided to tell her I was gay, she told me she was pregnant. So I thought, well, maybe having a baby will make those feelings go away. And they didn't. So after he was about a year and a half old, I said, I had quit school so that she could stay home with the baby. And I was working nights at a bank so I could try and at least get my last semester in. And I met somebody on a train. He cruised me on the train on the way home one night. And we ended up getting together that weekend. And first time we had sex, it was like, oh my God, this is what movies are made of, why people sing, why the birds fly, the doves cry. This is why doves cry and everything. It was like magic. And I fell in love with him instantly. And so I told her, and I said, this is not going to work out. I've realized I'm gay. And she was very cool about it at first. And we made the agreement that her sister was living with us because she had left her husband and had a baby. So I was supporting both of them. So we agreed that when the babies could go to preschool, until then I would support everybody. And then they would support me while I finished school the last year. And when the babies could go to preschool, they decided, nope, we're moving out and getting our own place, and screw you. So, so she got an apartment. She ended up dating somebody. It turned out he came out to her, and then the claws came out because she had two guys that came out on her to her. So,
well, kind of pivoting back to gay life.
Yes. So anyway, I was going to
go into the offices?
A parents group, and I would drop off the 3x5 index card with the announcements of meetings of our group, because the place I worked was right near the office.
Gay parents group, right?
A gay parents group, right. And one day I said to them, you don't have your cooking column anymore. I really missed it. The guy was really good. And they said, well, he moved away. Would you like to write it? And I said, well, I can cook because I put myself through college working as a chef. And I said, but I didn't know if I could write. I mean, I'd taken a couple creative writing classes in college and high school, but never really followed them. I was not the kind of kid that walked around with, a notebook and wrote things down. I was not that. And I was also not the kind of kid that would get lost in books all the time. I'm dyslexic, so that made reading difficult. I like to read, and I learned how to overcome my dyslexia at a fairly young age, so I could read fairly well. But I'm an auditory learner mostly. And so I said, well, let me go try. And so I wrote a couple columns, and I handed them in, and they liked them. And so I started writing the column on a weekly basis. There was no pay, but then I got involved with the gay community through that. I got asked to go to events and judge things and be part of the community. At the same time, I was volunteering at Gay Horizons, which was our community center, and meeting people there and coming out in the community more and more. And after a while, at Gay Life was bought by Chuck Renslow, who owned the Leather Bar,
And
and
founded International Mr. Leather
Mr. Leather.
Contest.
And I had heard all these, rumors that we would have to go to his mansion where they would have these 24-hour orgies and all that. And I was kind of naive and stuff and thought that was what was going to be going on. And I was not particularly interested in that. So one day I picked up Gay Chicago magazine, which had just started publishing, and I was riding the bus home from dropping off my column at Gay Life, and I looked up, and the address was right at the next bus stop. So I got off and walked over and said, "Would you like me to write for you instead?" And they were very excited and offered me money. And so, $25 a column. Wow. Yes, I would like that very much. And so I started writing for them.
Now,
And then
what year would this have been?
that would have probably been 79 or 780. Maybe 81 when I started writing for them. And so I started writing for them, and I at that time the movie Making Love came out. So I had been a gay married man, and so they asked me to review the movie. And so I ended up doing movie reviews, and I was interviewed on TV about that. And so my profile rose in the community, and I started writing about not just cooking columns, but restaurant reviews and how to throw parties and things like that. And then I started writing. I was writing for theater. I had my first play produced at that time in Chicago, and it was a big hit. It was the first play ever with a gay theme to be a gay musical to be reviewed by the mainstream papers.
And it was staged in a laundromat, I believe.
Well, it was set in a laundromat, but it was staged at a legitimate theater.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, and they're tearing the building down finally now, the theater building in Chicago. And the Tribune loved it and gave it rave reviews on the evening of my 10th high school reunion, which was very nice. The reviews came out, so I was all over the Tribune the night before my class reunion. The day after my class reunion, the Sun-Times hated it, so it was good timing.
Well, what I'm hearing is, I'm hearing a few things that, I've spoken to a lot of fiction authors, and they always say how much they read and they wrote, and your path is considerably different, and it sounds like, as often in life, a series of happy accidents that lead us in a direction.
Yeah, I mean, the
when
play
did you
happened
become
because...
interested?
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Rick.
Well, I was going to say the play happened because a friend of mine from high school, who I reconnected with after 8 or 9 years, we happened to we found out we were neighbors. She and her husband had a cabaret act they did, and they had a song in it called "Saturday Night is the slowest night of the week or saddest night of the week." And I went and saw their cabaret act, and it inspired a whole show from me. I wrote an entire show based on that number, and we were going to write a musical together, and it never worked out. So I put an ad in Gay Life. This guy answered it, and we wrote a whole show together. And then we wrote 4 or 5 other shows that were produced. And so and I always loved like musicals from movie musicals. I didn't go to Broadway stuff because I lived in Chicago. I mean, occasionally I think my family would take us to something, but normally it was like, I didn't grow up going to theater and things like that, but I loved big Broadway musicals, the big movie musicals. I love those things. And I loved big campy things like All About Eve and things like that. So that's the kind of uh, stuff I liked. And, the Jackie Suzanne novels, those were things I read. I love that stuff.
Well, let me ask you this. At what point did you become interested in history? And what led you to that?
Well, what led me to it, part of it is I ended part of what my thing at Gay Chicago is I ended up becoming the entertainment editor. They were a bar guide, and I kind of pushed them to expand to be an entertainment magazine, a gay entertainment magazine. So they started covering theater and music beyond disco. And, they would cover movies and plays and things like that. And we became fairly respected as an entertainment guide. We had awards that we gave out every year for cabaret and theater that were fairly coveted. And Gay Chicago gave out these awards for bars for years, the Gay Chicago Awards. So they would do things like, Bartender of the Year and things like that. So between the two, there was this history, and I always thought that, and then Suki and I sometimes wrote for the same papers and for opposite
Suki
papers. Suki Delacroix, because after I left Gay Chicago, I went to write for Outlines Nightlines, which has become Windy City Times. She bought out Windy City Times and took over the name. And Suki was writing for them at the same time. And he would interview people about the history of things. And he was very interested in the history of Chicago. And my thing was the history of the gay community is in the bars, because we didn't, until the 1980s, we didn't have community centers. We didn't have gay organizations that you could go to.
Well, the bars were, and a lot of people, maybe perhaps younger listeners, but a lot of people may not realize that the bars were the community centers. That's where information was exchanged. That's where ideas were exchanged. The gay bars formed a very vital part of the LGBT community. It was the crossroads.
Well, and any organization that's around today was probably founded by two people sitting around jotting notes on bar napkins in a gay bar. Latino Salud down here, which, was probably a couple of guys saying, we need a group for gay Latinos. What can we do? And they wrote down some notes on a bar napkin and then got together a bunch of people and formed a group and formed this organization. But it probably started with two people sitting in a bar talking. So that was my thought, is that we need to document our history. And so I joined up with Suki. I thought this is a perfect joining. I grew up in Chicago, so I knew the bars. He had this he wrote the definitive history of Chicago's LGBT community. So we formed an alliance and worked on this book together. And it was very interesting because Suki and I have very different ways of working on things. And so, but it worked out. It created this incredible book, Last Call, Chicago, always in the top 100 in Amazon's LGBT movies. It has been since it came out, I think it's 8 years ago now, 9 years ago.
Chicago Whispers?
No,
Chicago Whispers, Chicago.
Let's call Chicago.
And it's interesting. Last Call Chicago is in LGBT studies. Last Call South Florida is classified as a travel in LGBT travel. I don't know how Amazon does that, but they do. Okay.
So normally I ask people what book would they like to live in. Let's start with that. If you could live in a book, when an author creates, a book, they create a world. What book would you like to live in or visit, and why?
Oh, easy answer. Armistead Maupin's Tales of the City. I would love to live in that book. When those books would come out, I would run to Unabridged Books in Chicago, buy the latest copy. All my friends would buy it, and we would devour them. And I remember there was one, I was reading it, and my roommate was Calvin at the time. I was reading it in bed, and I was like, I picked it up and I just went through it till I was done. And at the end, this one guy gets stabbed, and you don't know if he's alive or dead because the book ends there. And I screamed, "Oh no!" And Calvin came running into my room because he thought I brought a trick home who was trying to kill me. But no, those books, I adored those books. And when I worked for Gay Chicago, I actually wrote an homage to them called Tales of the Second City that we serialized, just like Armistead did.
So, you're not the first author who's been on the show that has cited Tales of the City. What is it about Tales of the City that would make you want to live there?
He creates such rich characters. You feel you know them. And he's had the luxury, because they've been successful, for them to develop over years and years and years. And you've seen them grow. I mean, Penny Singleton, we've seen from, freshly moved from
Marianne Singleton. Sorry to correct you.
That's okay. Penny Pingleton is from Hairspray, Marianne Singleton. Marianne Singleton moving from, Ohio to San Francisco. And I just picture, Laura Linney playing her, but just in this little outfit with the hat and the gloves and things, and to becoming this worldly woman over the years. And, and then of course the character of Mona. Oh my God. Mona and
Michael?
Mouse.
Michael.
Mouse Michael. They're just one Brian Hawkins. They feel like people I know almost. And that's such a credit to Armistead's writing, because they really do feel so real to me. And that's wonderful writing. And I would love to be able to go and there are people I want to spend time with. I mean, there are books you read and you're like, oh, that was a wonderful book, but I wouldn't want to spend any time with, like Rebecca Mackay's book, The Believers, is a great book, one of the best books I've ever read. Wouldn't want to spend 5 minutes with most of those characters.
Well, I don't know that anybody would like to visit A Tale of Two Cities. But I want to ask you another question. First time we've asked anybody this, but because of your history and because you've written history, if you could time travel and visit any point in LGBTQ history, what era, what point in time would you like to visit, and why?
Well, it depends. I mean, do I have money? Because that's a big difference.
I don't know. That's up to you.
If I have money and I'm doing okay, the 20s and 30s would be great. But other than that, first of all, I don't think I could go back too far, because I don't think I could live without air conditioning. But I think the 20s would be a wonderful time to be alive, especially New York City in the 20s. And it also depends on where you are. I wouldn't want to be the 20s in Nebraska, but the 20s in New York, yes. So it depends on place as well. You know, the 20s.
Or Paris, I suppose.
Yeah, 20s in Paris, 20s in New York, yes. 20s in Fort Lauderdale, no. You know, because there wasn't anything here. So it depends on where you are and when is more to the point. And I'd want to be of an age where I'd be dead before the 50s when that new conservative comes around. I wouldn't want to have to hide everything then. And the thing is, if you have a lot of money, you didn't have to hide too much. You could live as you wanted. And that's the key, is I wouldn't want to have to hide anything. I'd want to be that eccentric millionaire that everyone knows about and whispers about. He's got so much money that nobody can say anything.
Well, money did insulate people, and not to say that some of those times weren't horrible for LGBT
well,
people.
And also, think, you know, I'm assuming I'd be white because that would make a big difference. You know,
well,
you go back and a person of color in the 20s, it's not going to be so great for you. You know, again, unless you have a lot of money and you're in another country. You know,
or you're part of the Harlem Renaissance.
Well, see, I'm assuming if I'm in New York in the 20s, I could know those people, even though I'm white. I could know the people from the Harlem Renaissance, and that's part of the reason why I'd like to be there then. Is, you know, I could be one of the people that goes up to Harlem and gets to know County Cullum and all those people.
It is interesting, you know, looking back, you know, just in our own histories. You know, I came out in 1973 when I was 17 years old, and sometimes we can paint it. It's hard to know, are we painting it with nostalgia because our age or because we're looking back? They were certainly in many ways bad times. But, you know, I wonder if sometimes our ages makes, you know, because it was a period of discovery, everything was new and exciting. Well, fascinating. Well, Rick, I want to thank you again for being on the show. And I'd like to remind everybody to please click on the subscribe or follow us. It really helps us with all those algorithms out there. But Rick, it's been delightful to talk to you. Thank you so much for being on our show, and perhaps we can have you on again. So everyone, once again, you've been listening, watching Bold Voices, Good Yarns. I'm Ian Henzel, the host. We've been in conversation with historian and author Rick Karlin. His latest book is, if I can get the book without dropping everything, Let's Call Florida. Pick up a copy. What? South Florida. Sorry. Let's Call South Florida. So we'll see you all on the show real soon. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye now.
You've been listening to Bold Voices, Good Yarns, brought to you by Rattling Good Yarns Press. Subscribe to our channels on Spotify and YouTube, and follow us on social media. Search for Rattling Good Yarns Press. Also, visit our website at rattlinggoodyarns.com, where you can find great reads and interesting articles about the world of books. See you soon!